Calgary Pride proudly serves Treaty 7 on the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi Confederacy, Ayahe Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina. This land is also home to a Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. This place, where the Elbow River meets the Bow, is known by many names to many people, including Mohkinstsis, Winchespa, Kutsiso, Wetaskiwin, and Calgary. We thank the Indigenous communities of Turtle Island for both the historic and ongoing stewardship and protection of the land we collectively inhabit today. Many nations and people, Indigenous and non, are fortunate to call Mohkinstsis and Treaty 7 territory our home. Acknowledging this land is Indigenous protocol, which we honor as a step towards reconciliation and fulfilling our responsibilities as treaty people. Working alongside all nations, Indigenous and non, we strive to create safe spaces where everyone can live openly and authentically.
Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Pridecast, brought to you by TJX. My name is Brit Nickerson, pronouns are she and they, and I am your host for today. I am the manager of communications at Calgary Pride. Our vision this year for Pridecast is to create space and visibility for folks who live in our city and have intersecting identities within the 2S LGBT+ community. Learning more about the history of the Pride movement in Mohkinstsis, Calgary can give us a better understanding of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. And with that, I'd love to introduce our very special guest today, Molly Caldwell, pronouns she and her, a Yonsei visual artist who focuses on textile processes. She's interested in Marxist feminism, equity work, and Mariah Carey. Thank you so much for joining us, Molly.
Thanks, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. So just a little context, Molly and I went to school together. We actually went to AU Arts, and then we did a little bit of work together at the New Gallery, a nonprofit here in Mohkinstsis, and I thought she'd be a wonderful guest for Pridecast today. So thank you again for joining me. First question for you, Molly. So a lot of your visual art practice is rooted in textiles, especially the act of weaving. Could you talk a little bit about your process and your practice?
Yeah, for sure. So I consider myself an interdisciplinary artist who specializes in textiles and with an emphasis on weaving. I'm capable of most textile processes that you can think of. I can do knitting, crochet, embroidery, dyeing. But yeah, my specialty is weaving. I've been weaving for a few years now. And yeah, my practice really revolves around the kind of foundational processes of creation. So you'll often find me, taking raw wool, spinning that into yarn, weaving that into a tapestry, and then using that tapestry for installations.
Yeah. I did a residency at the Bows, and you have a studio there. And when I would walk by your studio, I could always just see the most beautiful colored yarns and all the weavings you were I feel like you were never we were never there at the same time, but I always got to kind of see your process in action, static, but it was always just so beautiful. Yeah, no worries. So just as a follow-up, as a visual artist, have you always been drawn to textiles and weaving, or has it been kind of a growth from a different kind of medium?
Textiles have always been a really important part of my life. When I was a child, I was really unathletic. I was artsy. So instead of doing sports, my parents put me in sewing and poetry classes. So I've been sewing probably since I was about 10 years old. And I've always been really excited by textiles. I used to read teen magazines like Cosmo Girl and YM, and my favorite issues were the ones with the DIY features that would teach you how to turn t-shirts into purses and jeans into, skirts and stuff like that. So I think my parents gifted me my first sewing machine when I was about 12. And then they also gifted me my first loom in 2018. So it's really thanks to them that I do have all these textile inclinations. They've been really supportive of me being expressive and me, really embracing textiles.
Yeah, I love the phrase, I was unathletic and artsy, because that literally describes me as a child. Yeah. But I mostly played video games. So that's instead of doing something like sewing. But I remember in home ec class, I think I made one teddy bear from a pattern. And my mom was so proud. She kept it for 25 years, I think.
Cute.
Yeah, but ever since then, it's been a no for me doing that kind of stuff. I'm not that artsy anymore.
Yeah.
So my next question for you, does your identity as a femme LGBTQ plus person find its way into your visual art practice?
Yeah. My femme identity and my queer identity is very important to my practice and overall just my creative being. I'm really interested in hyper-femininity and femme as an identity that moves beyond just femininity, but is really an understanding of gender dynamics within society. I'm really inspired by a lot of femme aesthetics, especially ones that I feel like cis men might find a little alienating. The really long acrylic nails, excessive makeup, and, ideas like vanity, I'm really excited by in my work and in my everyday life. So I definitely embrace femme as, a source of inspiration in my work. Also, I think in regards to queerness, the color pink is really important to me and my work. I don't think I really work in any other color. It's my main color. Most of my work revolves around the color pink, and I use it because I'm really interested in its history as almost an oppressive color towards the queer community. And then it's now kind of reclamation, redemption, and it's kind of source of joy for the queer community. So yeah, that's pink, and the aesthetics of femme identity is really important to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that word reclamation too, because I feel like so much about like being queer is like reclaiming things. So, I love that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I saw your installation at Esker Foundation, and I think it said like boss babe or girl boss too. Yeah. And I love that kind of use of like what might be, I guess, like almost like an insult from like het men, like cis hetero men, mm-hmm. and kind of like reclaiming that and using it in your work. I really, really loved that.
Oh, thanks.
So when I look at your work, and this is like my own interpretation, but I'm instantly drawn to the ideas of like femininity and gender, and in particular like labor and the domestic. So could you tell us a little bit more about maybe how these concepts inform your practice?
Yeah. Femininity, gender, and labor, they're all very intertwined concepts for me. I tend to work with them all very fluidly. They all inform each other within my work. I'm very interested, as a textile artist, in the idea that textiles have historically been feminized labor, kind of relegated to private spheres, that were meant to keep women within the household. And so it's really neglected labor. It's really unappreciated labor. So I'm really interested in subverting all these concepts around femininity, gender, and labor. And so, having a really labor-intensive practice really allows me to kind of reclaim that labor and really emphasize it within my work. You mentioning the girl boss from my Esker gallery, that was kind of referencing how, contemporarily there's this infantilization now of feminine labor, this idea of the girl boss or the boss babe. It really, again, is just undermining all of these constructs around feminized labor. So I'm really, my practice is really informed by textile-based feminism, I guess is what I would maybe call it. So, reading Rosika Parker's The Subversive Stitch was really important, or Faith Ringgold's autobiography on her quilting, or, just reading about the G's Bend quilts, seeing these kind of women taking this labor and using it to reclaim and express and, create, I think is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think too about like the idea of like the invisible labor, which is often mm-hmm. like seen as domestic, like child rearing and house care, and like creating textiles is like it's work that's done typically by women, but it's like invisible. And I especially thought of that in your Esker Foundation project because your labor, your work was hanging there kind of by hooks, and like the artist was present, but also in a way like kind of invisible, like that domestic labor is typically seen. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So when I was reading about your work, I came to learn that your practice speaks to experiences of intergenerational trauma. Could you speak to that a little bit? I'm interested to know about the kind of connection between trauma and textile.
For sure. So the way that I've personally experienced intergenerational trauma is that my grandparents, my Japanese Canadian grandparents, were interned within Alberta during World War II. So that obviously has caused a rift, within my identity as a Japanese Canadian person. So I really look, back. They were interned in war camps. So their labor was really a burden. It was their, what they had to do in order to survive. Whereas the labor that I'm doing in my practice, I find very redemptive and healing. So I try and make, a lot of comparisons between that and try and see a lot of, how labor has fit within intergenerational trauma within my life and my grandparents' life. I've been kind of dealing with themes of my grandparents' internment with a little bit more emphasis in the past few years, thinking a lot about, how to honor my ancestors, how to, really embrace, my Japanese Canadian identity, being Yonsei, which is fourth generation Japanese Canadian. That's what Yonsei means. And yeah, I was awarded actually a Canada Council grant last year. That was a research grant that allowed me to do research into specifically textiles and healing practices. So I was reading a lot about how textiles have always been really fundamental in healing, sacred cloths that would aid injuries, or spinning whorls that were staffs for goddesses. So it's always been really fundamental in almost every culture that textiles have contributed to healing. And I think a lot about, even in contemporary instances, Dorothy Lieb's using weaving programs for veterans after World War II. So this idea that, this hand labor is really redemptive, is really healing, is, almost factual at this point. My most recent project that deals with this kind of theme is my publication with risograph publisher Yokeless Press. They helped me in republishing my grandparents' cookbook, which was acquired by, it was created by the Tabor Buddhist Church, which no longer exists, and it was created by their women's association. So we recreated that cookbook. And then we wrapped it in what is known as a furoshiki, which is just a Japanese way of wrapping things with a scarf. But, I was thinking a lot about this textile more, instead of wrapping, it kind of holding and protecting, instead of, just hiding the kind of publication. And then hoping that it can create some sort of transference with those who do buy it.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, when I like, the first thing I think of when I think of textiles is like the matriarchs in my family, and like the act of like passing on textiles. Like, my grandmother, she's far away from me now, but she'll often just send me like care packages with just like dishcloths and like various other like items she's made. And to me, that's just like as good as like embracing her, because it's just such a kind gesture, and it's with so much love. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
So Molly, you had an exhibition that we've referenced a few times at Esker Foundation last year, called "With One Hand Tied Behind My Back." Could you speak to this project a little bit, maybe like the process and the concepts?
For sure. So my Esker project was based on the character of Penelope from the Odyssey, specifically, is what it's referencing. Essentially, her story is that she's the wife of the hero, and while he's on his epic adventure, she's being courted by a bunch of suitors who want to marry her, and she promises to choose one of them when she finishes weaving a tapestry. So she weaves all day, and then at night she unweaves. So it's this never-ending process. And there's a lot of kind of theory into her, Penelope, as this almost feminist character who's been relegated to the sidelines of this story. But weaving for her was this incredibly autonomous, powerful act where she was able to, maintain her own, choices and her own, labor and her own, decisions that she was making through this weaving, through this act of weaving. So the exhibition itself was a 25-foot long hand-dyed and hand-woven tapestry that was unfinished, that was unraveled at the end. But I was also just thinking a lot about, her labor, just because it was feminized labor, because she was a woman, how neglected it really is to be appreciated. And then again, referencing, the girl boss, the boss babe, and how, these contemporary references to feminized labor are still, very, undermined constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know as part of that exhibition with Esker, you invited community members and folks to contribute to like a weaving that was publicly displayed. So could you maybe talk to us about the role of community engagement in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, community engagement is really important to me just because the idea of community itself is really important to me. I think it's really important that, my practice doesn't exist within a bubble, that it does, incorporate those around me, my communities, the land, everything like that. The workshops were 3 days where people came and they also learned how to make their own yarn out of secondhand textiles like old shirts and bed linens and stuff like that. And then they wove on a 8-foot loom that was built for me by the Esker. And I really also, this piece is so important to me because all of the yarn in it is secondhand. So I like this idea that it's not just a tapestry of yarn, but also a tapestry of people's, memories, these sentimental objects. I think of it as almost this way of preserving and, presenting it as like a woven story to, the world for people to look at.
Yeah, I was so drawn to it. I was like obsessing. I was just like looking at pictures of it. And I love this idea of like you hosting the workshops for folks and they can come and learn a skill. I think skill sharing is so important and a very reciprocal thing, kind of just like outside of like the systems of capitalism where we can like share our skills and our knowledge with each other. I think that's really important. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. I think textiles have always been this idea of knowledge sharing, they're rarely, or historically, they've rarely been taught in institutions. They've been passed down from generation to generation. So I like to think of textiles kind of, existing outside of this institutionalized idea of being taught. And just this really, equilateral way of learning and teaching is what I really appreciated about the workshops.
Yeah, that's really incredible. Thank you. So this is kind of a random question, but is there anything outside of, say, like your maybe like typical research that informs your art practice?
Something that I really do, something that I do that is really important to me is make my own clothing. It's something that like I said, I've been doing since I was very young, making tote bags, making skirts out of towels. I've always just been making my own clothing. It's really important to me, to recycle and reuse and try and use up as much as possible within a textile practice, because textile practices and textiles in general just create so much waste. And, within capitalism, fast fashion, hyper production, I'm really conscious of how much I'm, producing and how much output I'm giving. So being able to make my own clothes and mend my own clothing, has really helped inform this idea of just like recycling and everything like that. But it's also just something that I find to be very fun. And there's something really nice being an artist, I feel like you very rarely kind of get to enjoy your work in such a kind of, normalized way, and such clothing is an everyday, experience. And so it's really exciting to me to be able to do that.
Yeah. And everything you make is absolutely amazing.
Oh,
Every time it pops up on my Instagram feed, I'm like, I'm going to rewatch that story again and again because I am obsessed with your clothes. They are so great.
Thank you.
So my last question for you is, I know you have some upcoming residencies in Denmark and then Cleveland, which are kind of leading up to a show in Saskatoon. So could you maybe tell me a little bit about like what what your practice is going into these residencies, like, and what you're hoping to explore?
Yeah, so the main reason I'm actually doing these residencies is to use specialized weaving equipment. So in Denmark, I'm able to use a 24-shaft computerized loom. And then in Cleveland, I'm using a digital jacquard loom. So this equipment is really, really difficult to use as a textile artist. It's really expensive, it's hard to maintain, and it's really, just difficult to kind of come by. So I feel really lucky that I'm able to go to these locations and use this equipment. But so the exhibition that's coming up in Saskatoon in Saskatchewan is kind of about being a stunted millennial. I just turned 30, so it's a little pertinent, but it's using pop lyrics to kind of express the frustrations of kind of contemporary adulthood. But there is also going to be a few references to queer childhood that I'm excited to kind of do. Things like, the Britney and Madonna kiss at the award show. And,
iconic, yeah.
And the film Debs. So I'm kind of excited to get into a little bit of gay nostalgia, I guess, for the research for this. But yeah, this exhibition is called Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman. And it's coming out in June 2023 in Regina.
Yeah. Okay, I love everything you said. Totally agree with the sentiment of like, it's easy enough to or it feels easy enough to be an artist sometimes, but then when you don't have access to equipment, like I do photography and it's almost impossible to get large format film developed. So you have to go somewhere and do it. And it's almost like it's in a journey in itself to try and use these mediums. And yeah, queer childhood, I definitely, for me, Charlie's Angels.
Oh yeah.
That was a big one. And then playing Dungeons and Dragons. That was so unknowing at the time, but so queer coded in my childhood. So yeah, I'm so excited to see this. It's just I'm amped now.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be some kind of secret things that only queer kids who kind of had those experiences growing up will kind of get. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
That's really exciting. And that's my last question for you, Molly. So thank you so much for joining us. And if folks wanted to see more of your artwork, where would they go?
Yeah, thanks for having me. If they wanted to see my work, I am on Instagram at Molly JF Caldwell. And then my website is just mollyjfcaldwell.com.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. And I really look forward to seeing what you make in Saskatchewan.
Thanks.